Hello and welcome to Tech Deals, part 2 of the $2,000 Cadillac system build featuring the i7-8700K 6-core 12-thread Coffee Lake CPU Y-Vlog, or rather part 1 of the Y-Vlog. I am splitting the Y-Vlog into 3 parts to make it more accessible because otherwise these videos get to be quite long. In this video, CPU choice, motherboard choice, and cooler choice. I'll talk about liquid versus air, Ryzen versus Intel, K-chip versus non-K-chip. I'll talk about the different Z-series motherboards you can pick from, which are currently the only available choice since the H&B boards aren't launched yet. Those will launch sometime next year. And in the upcoming 2 videos is where we'll discuss case, power supply, RAM, graphics card, storage, and more. Linked in the video description below will be the full playlist of all the videos on this build. Part 1 was the parts overview, a short and sweet overview of all the parts in this build, what they're for, why I included them, and then following the Y-Vlogs will be the build itself. It will be a step-by-step guide with the camera overhead actually filming the build so that you can follow along. If you're looking for a video where you can actually buy all the parts, watch the video, and go, oh, I can put it together watching that video, then you want to watch my build guides because that's what they're aimed for. Furthermore, all the parts that I'm mentioning today will be linked in the video description below to both Amazon and Newegg. Please check those links out. They are affiliate links. If you find this video helpful and useful, please support the channel by shopping using those links when you're ready to buy. I would greatly appreciate it. Anytime you're doing a full system build, the first choice is your CPU, which is why we're discussing it first here in the Y-Vlog. The i7-8700K in December of 2017 when I'm filming this is full stop the fastest gaming CPU in the world. There's nothing else you can buy that will play current games today faster than this CPU. Now that won't be true forever, of course, and for productivity and content creation, other CPUs might be a better choice or a better value for the money. Ryzen 7, Skylake X, even Threadripper, depending upon what you're doing. But this build is all about gaming and live streaming. In fact, this computer is going to become my new live streaming machine. I live stream regularly on Twitch. Link to Twitch down below. I stream at least 3 times a week. If you're interested in watching along and hanging out and having fun with me in a live stream, please go check that out. Now, first up front, let me be absolutely clear. You don't have to buy an i7-8700K just to play some computer games. The i5 and even i3 CPUs will do that just fine. Ryzen does that just fine. The previous generation of CPUs do just fine. If you are not looking for top tier, Cadillac level performance, if you're not looking for the best, there are much more affordable options. The reason you want to go for this CPU is you want the highest frame rates, the highest resolutions, the highest detail settings, the best multitasking, live streaming, the most years of future in front of you for game playing, and frankly, just a premium overall user experience. It is faster than everything else, but you pay for it. It is not inexpensive, and we'll talk about that relative cost in just a minute with Ryzen. But I do want to be clear up front that if you just want to play some games and have some fun, you can do so spending a lot less money than this premium processor. Now, what I'm not going to do is to get into the entire spectrum of CPUs in this video. This is a Y-Vlog about the $2,000 build and reasonable alternatives to it, not every possible choice you could use for gaming. There are some $200 to $400 gaming machines you can put together that will play games just fine. We're not talking about those in this video. Primarily what I want to compare this CPU to are the other current Intel processors and then Ryzen 5 1600, which is its primary competition, not in performance, in value. Now, Ryzen 5 1600 is 6 cores and 12 processing threads, same as the 6 cores, 12 processing threads here, but it costs a lot less money, about half the price. It also comes with the excellent Wraithspire cooler. This does not come with a cooler in the box. So you might say, wait a minute, they're both 6 cores, they're both 12 threads, this comes with a cooler, and it's half the price. Oh, by the way, the motherboards cost less too. Why would anybody buy this? Performance. If you want to play games at 144 frames per second, do you have 144 hertz or even 165 hertz monitor? Do you want to play everything from Ghost Recon Wildlands to Grand Theft Auto 5, Battlefield 1, The Division? Do you want to play Call of Duty World War II, Assassin's Creed Origins? Do you want to play them at the peak level of performance possible? You need an 8700K. This is between 30 to 50% faster in terms of game frame rates than the Ryzen 5 1600 is. It's not double, but it is noticeably faster. It also provides a faster desktop Windows experience, Not as much of a leap as that, but it is definitely there. That's why I'm calling this the Cadillac Build. It's for the person who goes, I'm okay to pay a premium to get an incredible top tier level performance. If you want the deal, frankly, that's Ryzen 5 1600. About 2 months ago, I did a Ryzen 5 1600 build on my channel. It was a $1,200 build, but I provided an $800 version of that build as an alternative. Now, can you play all current games on the $800 version of that computer? Yes, you can. High detail, 1080p, 60 frames per second. That $800 machine will do it. So what do you get by spending $2,000? You're spending double the money or more than double the money. You're getting incredibly super fast storage, much quicker storage than was in the budget build. You are getting much higher frame rates, 100 to 144 frames per second versus 60 at the same resolution, or the ability to do 1440p and 4K. That $800 budget build is pretty much strictly a 1080p machine, at least for AAA games. It'll do Overwatch and League of Legends and Destiny 2 in 1440p, but it certainly isn't going to do anything in 4K. That's what you're getting for the premium money. A faster CPU, a faster graphics card, much faster storage, up to 5 times faster, more memory, a better case, a better power supply. You're getting more future behind it. You're just paying a lot to get there. Again, the Cadillac experience. Now, as far as Ryzen 5 goes, yes, there's also a 1600X. It is faster out of the box. They're both overclockable on an appropriate motherboard, but the 1600X doesn't come with a cooler. The reality is the performance difference between a 1600 and a 1600X is not as much as most people think it is, even when they're both overclocked. Even with the 1600X overclocked to 4 gigahertz, it is not in the same league as this CPU is. But it costs less, so fair enough. Now, Ryzen 7 is over there as well, and inevitably somebody's going to say, wait a minute, why are you comparing Ryzen 5? Why not Ryzen 7? Ryzen 7 is 8 cores, 16 threads. This is 6 cores, 12 threads. More cores benefits productivity and content creation applications in 2017 and 2018. Your games are not really going to run any faster on a Ryzen 7 than they do on a Ryzen 5. Maybe a little bit. Live streaming is a little bit nicer. It's a nice CPU. Definitely, if you want a 5-year CPU and you're going AMD, I think Ryzen 7 is at least worth considering, depending upon the price increase. We're kind of delving into a different topic now. But if you think, well, I'll just buy a Ryzen 7 and that'll be the same performance as this, not in gaming it won't be. It's the per core performance of this. It's this CPU running at 5 gigahertz that causes it to be massively faster than anything AMD makes. That's why it's 100 to 144 frames per second, whereas these CPUs are better for 60 to 100 frames per second gaming. That's enough about Ryzen. Let's talk about Intel for a minute on their other CPUs. I have here an i7-8700K 6-core, 6-thread K-chip. Overclockable, 5 gigahertz overclockable, just like this is. It's about $100 less expensive than the 8700K is. Should you buy one? Not if you're building something at this price point, you shouldn't. If you're going with the GTX 1080 Ti like I am in this build, if you're going with a premium system, a $200 motherboard, absolutely not. The extra $100 for this is worth every penny. Yes, it's true that a 6-core, 6-thread chip will play all current games just fine in 2017. Even in 2018, 18 months from now, going into 2019, you're going to be really sorry that you bought that. You're really going to wish you had the 12 threads of this. This is going to buy you much more performance in the next 18 months, maybe more so than it does today. By the time you're spending $2,000 on a computer, an extra $100 for the CPU is only 5%. Don't get cheap on your CPU if you're buying this level of components. Now, where this will change a bit is if you're building a $1,200 to maybe $1,400 machine. Maybe you're going with a $150 motherboard. Maybe you're going with a GTX 1070 or 1080 graphics card instead of a 1080 Ti. Fair enough. I can then understand why that CPU makes sense. But in the context of a machine with a GTX 1080 Ti that is a $750 graphics card, there is no CPU to buy but this one. Now that simply leaves us with the i7-8700K. Should you buy one? Possibly. I wouldn't necessarily put it with a 1080 Ti, but I think with a 1070 or 1080, it provides an interesting alternative to the 8600K. When I do the 8600K build in a couple of weeks, I will talk about that in more detail. Some people are better off with the 8600K, some people are better off with the 8700K. It depends upon what you're doing with the machine. Again, I'll talk about that more then, but suffice it to say that if top tier gaming performance is what you want, if 144 frames per second is what you want, then clock speed is what you need. It's the 5 gigahertz clock speed of these K chips overclocked that really makes the difference there. The 8700 turbos to 4.3 on all 6 cores out of the box, but it's not overclockable. Now this turbos to 4.3 gigahertz on all 6 cores out of the box. If you're buying a K chip and you're not overclocking it, why? That's the whole point. If you don't plan to overclock, save yourself the money and get the non-K chip. Both of these CPUs are the same performance without overclocking. This can be overclocked, that can't. That's primarily the difference. Now that's a lot of CPUs and comparisons. Let me turn it upside down and provide you with a different point of view, which I will discuss in more detail in the next Y vlog with the graphics card. If you are buying a $500 GTX 1080 or a $700 to $750 GTX 1080 Ti, I think the 8700K goes well with those, and I think it's worth it. If you're buying a $200 to $400 GTX 1060 or 1070, I think the Ryzen 5 1600 or perhaps the Ryzen 7 1700, depending upon what you're doing with your machine, makes a lot more sense. This does not mean that you can't put a 1080 Ti with a Ryzen. This doesn't mean you can't put a 1060 with the Intel. But those two combinations are a little bit mismatched. Let me give you 2 examples. Ghost Recon Wildlands at Ultra Detail is normally completely graphics card bound. Even with a GTX 1080 Ti, Ultra Detail is absolutely crushing. If you play at Ultra Detail at 1080p, the i7-8700K is up to 20 frames per second faster than a Ryzen 7 1800X. Yes, there really is that much difference. Even though the graphics card is pegged to 100% usage in both scenarios, the 8700K is still faster. It really lets those frames process. On the flip side, if you take a GTX 1060 at 1080p Ultra Detail, well, first of all, it's not really playable on either one, but the frame rates are virtually the same, because then you are so completely graphics card bound that it really doesn't make any difference. The CPU just sits around waiting for the graphics card. It's not fast enough. You're looking at 25 to 30 frames per second at 1080p Ultra Detail on a GTX 1060. And that's true for the 3 or 6 gig card either way. It just doesn't have the performance. A 1080 Ti, as I said before, is more than double the performance of a 1060. It really is that much faster. It's just expensive. But if you're okay to pay to get premium performance, then it's worth it. The last thing I want to discuss is generational comparisons. If you have an older i7, is it time to upgrade? Now, this will get its own dedicated video with its own dedicated benchmarks in the future, but let me give you the short, sweet version today. If you have an i7-6700K or a 7700K, you generally should wait. Wait about a year. The 9700Ks are going to come out probably this time in 2018, and then you'll have something to upgrade to at that point. Unless you're live streaming, unless you just upgrade every year and you want the best of the best, keep your 67 or 7700K. It's a little early to upgrade. Now, what if you have an older chip, a 4770 or 4790K, the Haswell and the Haswell Refresh? Actually, if you're just playing games, keep them. I actually would not replace a 4770 or 4790K with this just to play games in 2017 and 2018. I would also wait for the 9700K. The exception is if you're live streaming. If you want to live stream Ghost Recon Wildlands and you want to do so at a decent quality level while recording and streaming and multitasking, you actually do need more performance. Or 2 computers. That's a separate conversation. But the truth of the matter is, an i7-4790K really struggles to live stream Ghost Recon. How do I know? Because I have one. That's what this is replacing. I am replacing my 4790K live streaming machine with an 8700K because there are in fact some games that do not live stream well on it. And before some people say, well, just use GPU encoding, I have a 1080 Ti in that machine. I am using the NVIDIA GPU encoding, and it still struggles. I live stream Ghost Recon Wildlands. It's quite choppy, even turning the detail down. The truth of the matter is, either a Ryzen 5 1600 or an i7-8700 or 8700K or a Ryzen 7 or a Skylake is what you need to live stream those today, at least on one computer. Note that that does not apply to all games. That's only really sort of the tip of the iceberg of games. I do a lot of live streaming on my 4790K, XCOM 2, World of Warships, League of Legends, all that streams just fine without any issue whatsoever. It's only a small handful of games that don't. Now, if you have an older CPU before the Haswell chips, if you have an i7-2600K, for example, is it time to upgrade? Yes, I actually do think it is. I fully recognize that if you look at benchmark charts and you look at averages, an i7-2600K overclocked to say 4.5 gigahertz looks like it's just fine. And it is in many respects in terms of average frame rate. I have an i7-2600K. Those benchmark results will be included in the generational comparison. But more than just benchmark results, let me tell you, putting this machine side by side with an i7-2600K overclocked to 4.5 gigahertz, I can see and feel the difference. Not even in games, just in Windows, the entire machine is quicker and more responsive. My i7-2600K has a nice Samsung SSD in it. I've put a GTX 1080 Ti in it. It's a nice machine. This is noticeably faster to the naked eye. Forget benchmarks. If you're on a Sandy Bridge chip or an Ivy Bridge chip, if you are wanting more performance, if you don't like the stutters and the hiccups that you sometimes experience, if you do want the best performance and you plan to put a modern 10 series graphics card, it's time to upgrade. Now, really quickly, Skylake X and Threadripper. Are they good gaming CPUs? They can be. That's not what they're for. They're for content creation. Yes, you can use the Skylake X and Threadripper CPU for live streaming games. They do have more cores, more threads, more PCI Express lanes. As a general rule, if you are not doing serious professional content creation, if you are not making money with your computer, I would skip Skylake X and Threadripper and I would buy one of these choices. These are better value for the money. I've done a build with Skylake X. I will be doing a build next month with Threadripper, but those are for content creators. I'm a content creator. I publish videos to YouTube for a living, so it makes sense for me to have such machines. Skylake X, especially with its higher clock speed, can be used for gaming. I have used it for gaming. For gaming alone, this is faster than even the i9-7900X, for example. To sum it up, if you want the best of the best Cadillac experience, 8700K is worth the money. On the other hand, do you want the value for the money Chevy experience? I highly recommend the Ryzen 5 1600. It is an incredible deal. The Ryzen 5 1600 with the included race bar cooler overclocked to 3.7 gigahertz fixed on all 6 cores, plays all current games at 60 to 100 frames per second with appropriate graphics just fine. This overclocked to 5 gigahertz with a 280 millimeter or a large tower air cooler such as the one I'm going to be installing. 5 gigahertz, 144 plus frames per second on almost everything today with a 1080 Ti graphics card, of course. You basically have two choices that are very different price points. It just depends upon what you want out of your computer. That brings us to motherboard choice. Now, we are only discussing the i7-8700K here when I go over all these different motherboards. Let me be absolutely clear. If you get an i7-8700 non-K, they'll all work fine. You can buy the $99 Z370 board and it will handle a non-K chip just fine. The extra voltage, the extra power delivery needed to run to 5 gigahertz is only needed for the overclockable processor. So we're only talking about the K chip. Furthermore, we're only talking about the i7K chip. When I do the i5-8600K build, we'll talk about that CPU in more detail. From the standpoint of overclocking to 5 gigahertz, we're not looking for the most RGB, we're not looking for the fanciest sound chip. What we're looking for is the best power delivery. How many power phases, what voltage regulators are on the board. Now, most of the Z370 boards in the $150 price point and higher have very good power delivery. There's a couple of exceptions, but most of them are very good. Now, there are currently $100 to $120 Z370 boards I would not recommend. A good example, let me just use the MSI line to point out a couple of examples. All three of these boards would be wonderful. The Gaming M5, the SLI Plus are also great boards for that because they all have excellent power delivery. The MSI Z370 Tomahawk does not. If you actually look at the board and you look at the power delivery around the socket, it is not as good as it is on these boards. Yes, you do save maybe $20 over the cost of some of the $150 options, such as the Crack Gaming. It's not worth it. If you're putting together this level system, Something like the Crack Gaming would be the lowest I would go with. To be completely honest, I would really spend a bit more and consider getting a nicer board. No, you're not necessarily going to get better overclocking out of it, but you will get a nicer overall experience, more features, more options. Do keep in mind that the price difference between a $150 and a $200 board on a $2,000 system is 5%. If you're really worried about the $50, are you really going to plug a $750 video card and a $400 CPU and a bunch of other very expensive parts into a budget motherboard where everything has to run off of? My opinion, $200 is the sweet spot for this kind of system. Now, there's a market for the lower end boards, the 8600K and the non-K chips, for example. But for the i7-8700K, $200 is a reasonable amount. I am not in this video going to attempt to remotely compare all of these motherboards. That's for a separate which Z370 should you buy. Let me just give you two specific recommendations at two different price points. At $150 for 5 gigahertz overclocking on the 8700K. From MSI, the Crack Gaming or the SLI Plus. Those have the good power delivery. Skip the Tomahawk and skip the lower level PC Pro boards. Those do not have good power delivery for 5 gigahertz. Yeah, they might do it. Get the Crack Gaming or the SLI Plus. From ASRock, get the Killer SLI or the Extreme 4. They're both about $130 to $150. They both have excellent power delivery. In fact, ASRock has some incredible values for the money. That even comes with AC Wi-Fi for about $150. Now, what about Gigabyte and what about Asus? No. At the $150-ish price point, the problem you run into is the Prime Z370A is too expensive and the Prime Z370-P board doesn't have the power delivery for 5 gigahertz. And the Gaming Ultra up here, which is currently running about $140, also has inferior power delivery. Here's the irony. Will this overclock to 5 gigahertz? Yes, it will. I've had this on my test bench. It will overclock to 5 gigahertz. You're pushing it. The temps are getting warm and hot. The Gaming 5 is a much better choice for 5 gigahertz than the Gaming Ultra, but it isn't a $150 board. Now, if you can find it for $150, I would recommend the Gaming 5 for 5 gigahertz all day long. Good board for that, but at normal price, it's closer to $200. Likewise, Asus really doesn't have anything in that price point with the power delivery that I would recommend. Now, BioStar is an interesting thing. I don't have tons of experience with BioStar. I've used one BioStar board in a previous giveaway that was on Ryzen. It worked fine, but that was not extreme overclocking. This does have good voltage regulators on it. Would I buy this for 5 gigahertz overclocking? Would I buy this for, say, a $2,000 build? Honestly, I would have to say no, and I apologize in advance to BioStar because BioStar sent me this motherboard, but the reality is, with all the other available choices, BioStar is a smaller company. You do get a lot of value with them. You get a lot more features for the money, but they are a smaller company. For a $2,000 Cadillac build, frankly, I'd go with ASRock or MSI, or frankly, Asus or Gigabyte for that matter. Now, I will use this board on something more mid-range in the future. It does have a lot for the money, but I wouldn't put it in a $2,000 build just because of the size of BioStar. Now, if you have $200 or more to spend, you have a lot of amazing choices. Let's start with MSI. The Gaming Pro Carbon that you can see here or the Gaming M5, just slight variations of each other. Either one is a spectacular choice, just slightly different appearance and slightly different feature sets. The Gaming M5 has killer networking, whereas this has the Intel Gigabit Ethernet networking. That's a personal choice. Coming to Asus, the ROG Strix is a great board. Now, they do have their Maximus 10, and they've got some others, but those are more expensive. I would skip those and get either the Asus ROG Strix or the Prime Z370-A board. Make sure it's the A and not the P or one of the others. Those are very, very good boards. From Gigabyte, either the Gaming 5 or the Gaming 7. I'm very partial to this Gaming 7. Do you want RGB? Do you want all the RGB? This is the most RGB I have ever used or seen in anything. Very, very beautiful board. Individual zone controls, the PCI Express slots, the RAM slots. It is literally Christmas on your desk. Now, the Gaming 7 is actually $250 in most cases, although I actually got mine for $200 because there's often sales and deals on them. But the Gaming 7 is very nice. These have the same power, just slightly different feature sets. Now, as far as ASRock goes, Tai Chi. The Z370 Tai Chi has a spectacular power delivery system. If you want extreme overclocking, if you want to go beyond 5 gigahertz, maybe 5.2 gigahertz, you're going to put a really big cooler or perhaps do open loop cooling, that should be on your short list. I would almost compare the Tai Chi to the Maximus 10 from Asus. I mean, it really is a premium board for a premium experience. Now, of everything I've discussed here, I've not yet mentioned the Godlike Gaming. Well, first of all, thank you, MSI, for sending that. Thank you for providing it for a review. Thank you for providing it for a giveaway. It is a gorgeous board, has every feature you could possibly imagine. It is incredible. It's also $500, and frankly, there's no logical, rational reasoning for a $500 board. I apologize, MSI. I love you, but yeah, no. Now, if you won the lotto last night, if you're wealthy, if you just don't care, if you just want the best because, you know, you only live once, knock yourself out. It probably is the best motherboard out there at the moment. The power delivery on this is incredible. It is nice, but it's expensive. So for 99.9% of you, skip that and get one of the 200, maybe $250 boards if you want a premium experience. That brings us to coolers, which are cool. We need a CPU cooler. Now, these are monster coolers. Let me talk in the abstract, and then I will talk about these specifically, as well as a few alternatives which are not sitting here. If your goal is to run an i7-8700K at 5 GHz on all 6 cores, 12 threads with no negative AVX offset, you're going to need a big, large cooler. Small, basic $20 and $30 coolers are not going to cut it. Now, the i7K chip does not come with a cooler in the box, and that's frankly just fine because the Intel stock cooler really wouldn't do it even at stock speeds. You really do need aftermarket cooling for the K chips. Now, first up, if you want to run your i7-8700K at stock speeds, all you really need is a Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo. The truth of the matter is, for $20 to $30, that will do the job just fine. It'll run cool and quiet. It is great. If you're interested in budget liquid cooling for stock speeds, then all you need is something like this. Cooler Master's Master Liquid 120 Lite. This can often be found for under $50 for a 120mm liquid cooler. It is a great value for the money. But let me be absolutely clear. Neither this nor the Hyper 212 Evo is going to do 5 gigahertz. The temperature will simply go crazy. You've got to have more cooling than this for serious overclocking. Now, what I'm not going to talk about are open loop or custom cooling. That is way outside my wheelhouse, and it's outside of a channel called Tech Deals. Such solutions are expensive. Now, if you want 5.3, 5.4, if you want extreme overclocking on a super high-end board, such as that Godlike from earlier or something like the Maximus 10, then yes, you might very well want custom open loop cooling, in which case Jay's 2 cents or one of the other channels that handles those would be a better place to get that information. I focus on value for the money and the most reasonable, easy thing to do for the average person, and that's either a large tower cooler or a closed loop cooler, otherwise known as an all-in-one or an AIO. Let me talk about these large coolers first. First, we have the one that is perhaps most well known throughout the computer business today, the Noctua D15. This is an absolute monster cooler. It retails for $90, and frankly, this will have no problem whatsoever running an i7-8700K at 5 gigahertz, or possibly faster, depending upon your tolerance for fan speed and fan noise. This will do the job just fine. But it has the same deficiency that these do. It is huge. It is going to block one of your RAM slots most likely. It requires a large case with a lot of room. It requires a case that also has a lot of additional case fans to expel the air from the case because it just dumps all the heat inside of it. And of course, it can be challenging to install if you've got an oversized graphics card or a motherboard with large VRM heat sinks. That's really the downside to a large tower cooler, is challenge to get it into your system without it blocking everything or even fitting. Furthermore, the other concern with a large tower cooler is the weight. These things are not lightweight. Once you put it in, if your computer sits on the desk or sits under your desk and never moves again, it's fine. It's just going to sit there. It'll be okay. If you move your computer a lot, if you go to LAN parties, if you go to conventions, if you travel, if you take it to school and home or work and back, I would not want to go with one of these, because every time you pick up and set down the machine, the momentum of setting the computer down is transferred to the cooler, which puts stress on your motherboard. There are reports of people who just set their computer down a little bit too hard and this actually cracked their motherboard. But that's not just the Noctua. That's true of any of the large tower coolers. They're big and heavy, and frankly, the weight on the motherboard could be an issue if you move your computer a lot. Now, those are some of the downsides to tower coolers. What about the upsides? Well, first of all, they're air coolers, not liquid coolers. These genuinely do have liquid in them, and while I personally have never had one leak, they do from time to time. You can't sell the thousands upon thousands of these that get sold and not have at least a few fail, and you can certainly find reports of those online. That being said, if you look at the 4.5 to 5-star reviews on Amazon and Newegg, you'll see most people are very, very happy with these. But if that is a concern of yours, there's nothing to leak in any of these. Another benefit is noise. Now, some people may think, as I once did a few years ago, that liquid coolers must be the silent, quiet solution for everyone. The reality is some liquid coolers are not actually that silent. What they are is extremely good coolers. They're very good at, no pun intended, cooling your CPU to the lowest temperature possible. What they don't necessarily do is provide the lowest noise footprint. Some of these air coolers with their large oversized fans and the lack of a pump are extremely silent. If you want a very quiet system, these 3 air tower coolers are virtually inaudible. I currently have that DarkRock Pro 3 installed on my i7-8700K downstairs. It's completely silent. Even overclocked, you cannot hear it at all. Now, I have not yet used either of these personally, although I've talked to other people who have, and I know that they're very quiet. I trust the other reviewers who have tested them, so I'm comfortable saying that they are, in fact, very, very silent. The liquid coolers are silent, but they are not quite as silent as these are. Another benefit of the air coolers is they also tend to be less expensive. The DarkRock Pro 3 and the D15 are both about $90. It's about $20 more for the Mastermaker Air 8. The H115i Corsair, for example, runs about $130, so it's more expensive than these. Yes, the 240s are cheaper, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So these do have a price advantage. They also have basically no maintenance other than making sure your system is dust-free. And of course, if a fan fails, then the computer will alert you if the CPU gets too hot, you replace the fan. But essentially, these will last forever. Even if you have to replace the fans at some point, even 5 or 10 years down the road, it's essentially a big, large block of metal. There's nothing to ever do to it. You just put it in and you can use it indefinitely. The reality is the liquid pumps and the reservoir and the design of liquid coolers, there is a relative finite life to liquid coolers. I wouldn't use one for 10 years, for example, something to consider if you tend to keep your coolers through multiple CPU generations. Now, this isn't meant to be a review of any one cooler specifically, but I do want to give a shout out to Be Quiet. That is the nicest quality cooler I have ever used in my 20 plus years of doing this, bar none. And I don't necessarily mean its temperature or noise, although it's extremely silent. The quality of it is incredible. The polishing on the heat pipes, the polishing on the screws, the threads on the screws were polished. It is one of the nicest machined pieces of metal that I have ever put into a computer. I give 2.5 thumbs up to Be Quiet for a very well-made cooler. There is not a sharp edge to be found on it anywhere, and it looks really, really sharp. I like it. I am very pleasantly surprised with it. Now, these, as I said, I've not actually personally installed, although I've looked at them and they look very, very nice. Expect reviews individually on these at some point in the future. That brings us to liquid coolers. Now, I've used a lot of liquid coolers on a lot of systems. My oldest liquid coolers now are about 5 years old. Knock on wood, I've not had any problems with them. Now, as far as leaks go, 5 years is about as long as I will use a liquid cooler before I will retire it. I just don't trust them beyond that point due to pump life and hose deterioration and other issues. If this is a concern of yours, these things exist. But if you want the best actual cooling performance, frankly, liquid is the way to go. Now, there are several different models of 280mm coolers on the market. Cooler Master actually just recently retired their previous model, which is on my test bench back there. It is the Cooler Master Master Liquid 280 Pro. It's very nice, and it was extremely reasonably priced for a while, but it's pretty much gone at this point. Expect something new in 2018. NZXT also sells the Kraken X62, which is gorgeous, beautiful, and wonderful in all respects, but expensive at $160. Fair enough. EVGA has their CLC 280, which is also just fine. Basically, it comes down to which one do you like the looks of, which one do you like the price of, because the actual cooling performance of all the 280s is more or less the same. Now, why do I have a 240 on the desk, you might ask? Do I recommend a 240? Not for an 8700K at 5 gigahertz, I don't. It will do it, just. But you're going to get a lot more noise out of it because those fans will have to turn much faster. A 280 millimeter liquid cooler has 36% more surface area on the radiator than a 240 does. So the fans have to turn faster. There's less radiator surface area to dissipate the heat. You're going to get a lot more noise out of a 240. And not just Cooler Master's here. I'm not knocking Cooler Master's Master Liquid 240. In fact, if you have to buy a 240, if the case choice that you've picked doesn't have room for a 280, I would buy that cooler. And the reason is because it's less expensive than the others. Corsair's H100i V2 is an extremely nice cooler, but it's as much as $50 more expensive than the Master Liquid 240 is, for example. Note, this is not a light. I wouldn't buy the light for an i7-8700K. Buy the standard or even the Pro. But if you've got the room, it's 280 or bust. Now, what about 360 millimeter coolers? Now, in fairness, I've actually never used a 360 millimeter. Most of the main companies don't make one. A few do, but Corsair does not, Cooler Master does not. If you want a 360, sure. The 360 is going to, of course, be larger than a 280, but it takes a lot of room and space to install, and they do tend to cost more. But if you've got the room and you want the large cooler, then by all means, go for it. Now, if after watching all this you say, wait a minute, you're saying that these large tower coolers are extremely quiet, but the 280 millimeter coolers provide superior cooling performance. That's exactly what I'm saying. Well, how do you get the best of both worlds? Believe it or not, you can, but it costs more. I have a Corsair H110i on my Skylake X. I've done that build on my channel. The Cooler Master Master Liquid 280 Pro is on my test bench behind me. You can see it just right there. Neither one of those coolers still has the Corsair or Cooler Master fans. I love both of you guys, really, but your fans are not completely silent. The Be Quiet fans are. How much so? Go buy yourself a pair of these. These are the Silent Wings 3 140 millimeter 1000 RPM fans. I have two of these on the liquid cooler back there on the Cooler Master Master Liquid 280 Pro, and I have two of these under my desk right now on my Skylake X system on my Corsair liquid cooler. The noise difference was obvious and clear. I didn't have to test with a sound meter. I didn't have to measure it. Changing out the fans was noticeable. Now, these are not inexpensive. These are $20 a piece on Newegg. I will link to them down in the description. But if you want the superior cooling performance of a 280 millimeter liquid cooler, but you want the incredible silence of these things, these are worth the investment. Now, you're spending $40 to buy two fans, but let me tell you, I promise you, they really are absolutely completely silent. And I'm getting in the mid 60-degree temperatures while gaming at 5 gigahertz on that 280 millimeter cooler back there. So they do provide enough airflow even at 1000 RPM, which is basically silent. Now, inevitably, somebody's going to ask, what about brand X or brand Y that's not covered here? Cryorg, Fangs, and just various other brands of coolers, assuming I'm not mispronouncing those. Let me say this. Large tower coolers with dual 140 millimeter fans are large tower coolers with dual 140 millimeter fans. They're probably all going to be pretty similar, and they're all pretty much going to cost a similar price. As I mentioned, the 280 millimeter liquid coolers are all more or less the same in terms of cooling performance, the radiator size. Again, if you want to go to extreme, open loop cooling, custom cooling is really your only reasonable option. EK water blocks is frankly where I would go. My understanding is that they basically make the best stuff in the business, and they've got kits where you could basically buy all the components and put it together yourself. But I've seen people spend $400 to $500 doing a custom open loop cooling job with the EK water blocks. It's the best of the best, and it does cool better than any of this stuff does, but you can spend more money on those cooling systems than the whole CPU costs. So there comes a point at where you're basically, you're spending a lot to get a relatively minor jump in performance. If you're looking for the value, and I hope you are at a channel called Tech Deals, skip those and buy something you see here. This has been part 1 of the Y vlog. As I said before, link down in the description below is the full playlist of all the videos on this build, including the future upcoming Y vlogs. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe, big red button down below, questions and comments. And if you found this video helpful and useful, please use my links in the video description. They are affiliate links. They do support me and enable me to keep making more of these videos. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.